Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first 2023 special event for Brandjectory. Today, I'm very excited to be with you, along with my co-founder partners, Tom Malengo and Susan Bryington of the Litchfield Fund. We're very excited to have Adam Spriggs as our guest speaker, who will be talking with us about really an essential concept and topic about breaking through into the mainstream and how that happens. Before we get that, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This is a webinar, so if you, the only people that are visible are the folks that are up in the panel. If you have questions, we are going to have time at the end for Q&A. And as well, if you would like to post a question as we go, feel free to put that into the chat. Adam, are you good with questions as we go, or do you want to hold them to the end?
Probably hold them till the end, but if they want to just accumulate in the chat, and maybe you guys can help me walk through a few of the questions once we get to the end.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. And just lastly, for those of you who are new to Brandjectory, welcome. We're glad that you could join us. Briefly, Brandjectory is a platform that helps early stage CPG founders prepare for and to navigate the capital raise process. And then we also provide those prepared founders access to CPG best fit investors. We do that through a combination of both an online portal, a platform rather, as well as offline facilitated meetings, all virtual. From the preparation side, we have a very extensive and acclaimed knowledge base of over 200 articles that we've written across 65 topics of navigating the capital raise process and building an investable CPG business. Our profile structure includes help tips that explain what's being asked, why an investor is interested, and examples of good answers. We do a review of your profile before you're live on the system to provide our observations, recommendations, and feedback to help you put your best foot forward. Soon, we will also be adding to that process of an included conversation with a debt expert who will help on the help you understand your capital strategy options. And then once you're on the platform, we've customized a dating site so that you are essentially presented with investors who are the best fit based on alignment to your profile. Offline, we have virtual meetings, as I said, every month. I'm sorry, there's one other element to the education and knowledge process, preparing process, and that's ongoing mentoring and coaching. We have a platform where you can schedule time directly with investors and industry experts, one-on-one, ask them questions about your raise, ask them questions about your business. And there's an incredible amount of knowledge and interest in trying to help early stage founders through their process. Then offline, we have the virtual facilitated meetings. We have founder investor meetups. We have founder to founder chats that are incredibly helpful for sharing wisdom of the crowd and asking questions of your fellow founders. And then we have special events like this where we can bring you industry experts, and special topics that are of special note and can be very helpful when building your strategy or getting some tactical things done. We've got one of these planned every single month through the year. So with that, we welcome you again, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Adam Spriggs. Actually, I would also say, too, that Adam is one of the original investors that joined Brandjectory when we launched in beta more than 3 years ago. So Adam, thanks for being here, and thanks for being a friend of Brandjectory.
Yeah, we ended up getting rolling almost at the same time with when Brandjectory was getting off the ground in the Angel Group. So I've got a special connection with Brandjectory and a big fan of the platform. In all sincerity, I think I've been on, I don't know, close to maybe 10 calls and try to participate whenever I can. And I advocate for it all the time. I think it's a great platform for entrepreneurs to get involved with. Obviously, there's connection to investors, but the resources that are available to folks, and you never know where inspiration or a connection might strike that can really help your business. And it's an active, well-organized community. So I'm a big fan of what you put together.
Thank you. Thank you.
So shall we dive in?
Let's begin.
All right. Well, what I'll do is just make sure on the tech side here, I've got everything going the right way. So I'm going to share my screen and just let me know if I've got the green light here to get rolling then.
Looks good.
Okay. So before we dive in, I'll just give maybe a 60 second rundown of my backstory leading up to the Angel Group. So I've spent the better part of my career working at agencies, bringing new brands and products to life. And most recently, I joined an amazing outfit called Thirstcraft, actually based out of the UK. I'm helping to anchor their rollout into the United States. But we've assembled just an outstanding group of 30 people who are just as obsessed with the industry as I am. And we work with emerging brands like Loverboy and Brooklyn Brewery, challenger brands, if you'd want to call them. Then also global and category leaders like Boston Beer and Campari and The Botanist and Ooni Pizza. And I'm probably biased, but I think that the work that comes out of our studio is really second to none in the industry. But I mentioned my background because I stand up here before you not as an expert investor or a finance guy, but as someone who kind of sees the world through how you position and present brands and products to win attention in sales. That's my lens. So that's my disclaimer before I ramble on about what I look for in investment opportunities. But I started the Angel Group in October of 2019-ish. And really to surround myself with people who could add other kind of essential layers to my limited point of view around CPG and investing. And now here we are, 36 months later. It's a syndicate of 75 members, just amazing access to deal flow, thanks in large part to our members who are very well connected in the industry. And we're not, a lot of the folks in the group are like me. We're not necessarily serial angel investors, but many of us are operators, CMOs, CFOs, sales specialists, leading trade consultants. And then we have a number of members who come in from like VC and private equity and family offices who invest personally through the group. Now we typically invest in angel and seed rounds. Our average contribution to a round is about $100,000. And we've invested nearly $1 million to date into some really well-established and some really promising brands. So from Poppi and Siete to Loverboy, and you get Chubby Snacks and Bubble Skincare, or Bora, Bowie, Barcode, Goodles, Proper Good, a lot of brands that you're probably familiar with. But I'm really proud of the founders and the brands that we've backed at the Angel Group. So when people ask me what I look for in investment opportunities, there's so many ways to answer that, but here's where my mind goes. If the revenue threshold for attracting interest from strategic buyers is $100 million, and you could probably debate that, but my first inclination is to ask which brands reach that scale and what are the common DNA amongst them. And one obvious thread between brands like Chobani and Siete and Skinny Pop and Body Armor is that they ramp to $100 million brands because they thrive in high volume retailers where the bulk of grocery dollars are spent every day in this country. And I realize that's not exactly breaking news, but if you're an investor, just consider how few early stage brands in your inbox will become a constant presence at shelves and households across the country. So you have to ask, well, why is that such a rare outcome? And I think there can be a wide spectrum of reasons. Of course, there's a lot of things that have to break right. And this may be a bit controversial of a take, but perhaps the most common factor that I see is because most CPG founders are out of touch with how the rest of the world kind of, or the rest of the country at least, lives, eats, and drinks. And that's kind of been my go-to line here, and just talking about kind of my point of view. If you can just consider this for a moment. So if you're in a position to launch or invest in a food brand, to write a $25,000 check or raise $250,000 or $500,000, you are probably living and consuming within a reality that is materially different than the customers that you need to scale with at a Walmart or a Safeway. And so most CPG founders are innovating within echo chambers that are detached from the realities, the interests, the comfort zones of the majority of shoppers. And maybe in some cases, they're just a little too far ahead of the trend curve, and consumers come around to kind of what they're putting out. But I think what we need are more CPG entrepreneurs who are innovating in what I call the sweet spot, where you're designing products and using symbolism and messaging strategies to win trial and sustained adoption with the shopper majority that you ultimately need for scale, without compromising appeal to the minority that you need for traction. And that's what we want to talk a lot about today, is how you go about doing that. But this can be a bit of a tightrope to walk, but there are very clear differences between these two kind of ends of the spectrum. I think of the shopper minority as the 10% of the population who are trying to be 100% better every year, right? They value health superiority. They take pride in being risk takers, trying new concepts. And as a consequence, they tend to cycle through brands faster. They try different brands and and cycle through to new brands faster. They're more virtuous consumers. They see brands as badges of their identity and their values and their social status, where the shopper majority, on the other hand, is the 90% of the population who are trying to be 1% better every year. And they value slight guilt reduction. They make more mechanical purchase and replenishment decisions. They prioritize satisfaction and taste, convenience, affordability, and value. So there can be a real difference there. And but as you're going, it's kind of hard to distinguish, what might be waiting for you around the curve if you're, as you try to get into more conventional retailers. And it's hard to question product market fit in the early days when you're growing 100% month over month at Foxtrot, or some of your initial retailers that you're in. Whole Foods might be bringing into 2 new regions, and celebrity X or Y or Z just joined your cap table, and everybody's, super excited. And that's when you start seeing the rocket emoji start flying around on LinkedIn, and somebody's chiming in with "let's fucking go," all caps, exclamation points, and there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of hype and hysteria around the brand. But early traction can be deceiving, and I think founders and investors really need to be able to discern the difference between current performance and crossover potential. And so how do you know if you have a concept that's truly scalable? And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And I can tell you that it helps to spend time in markets like Toledo, Ohio, where I'm at retailers like Meijer and Kroger and Walmart and Heinen's, and to put products in front of these mass market shoppers before you actually get in these stores. And my studies aren't the most data rich or scientific. I just spend a lot of time in store. I spend a lot of time talking to consumers. But there are some commonalities that I see between brands who scale at mass market retailers. And so what I'll do is I'll share a little bit of what I found here. So the first thing that crossover brands get right is that they lean into product concepts that are already familiar and approachable to the masses in terms of like product format, just the essential, the basis of what the product proposition is, right? So Cauliflower is a great example. It's an approachable twist on something we already know and love and eat all the time, right? It's pizza just made from low carb crust, so you don't have to feel so bad about popping one of these in the oven at 10 p.m. on a Friday night. You look at Siete, their grain-free tortilla chips. That's not too big of a leap for Kroger shoppers, right? But if you Go to the other end of the spectrum, this is going back a couple of years ago, but like with Forager and these, leafy green tortilla chips, now that's going to come with some reservations and some odd looks from that shopper. Same thing with like a dandelion tea, which is actually delicious, by the way, and there's a market for it, and there's a lot of interest around dandelion tea and products, dandelion-based products. But this is also largely an unfamiliar concept to the majority of shoppers. Same thing with like a shelf-stable egg-based omelet bar, which I also quite enjoy. But there's a barrier between kind of like what the product actually delivers, and there's sometimes a hesitation for a shopper to approach or investigate a product like that. So today's mainstream consumer is more adventurous, yes, but confusing their risk profiles with that of an early adopter at Whole Foods can be a big mistake. So it's prudent to spend time studying the innovations and the surface level signals of brands that crossed over in a big way. And the more new and weird and obscure and polarizing or complex that these surface level signals are, that you're going to introduce into that initial impression, the more trial rejection that you could find as you look to cross over. So another thing they get right is that crossover brands anchor to benefits that are meaningful to the masses. So product attributes that are trending in one corner of the country might not reflect what's important to the mainstream shopper in your category. And the example I always draw on for this is plant-based, right? So something like 50% of consumers drink plant-based milks, which is awesome. It's a stunning stat when I first saw it. But this hasn't translated into ice cream. All right, so vegan sales account for just something like 3% of category spend. And so then if you go and you take a vegan ice cream and then bolt on like a low stakes benefit like mood management, that's going to only shrink your addressable market even further. And mood management is great for a supplement, a beverage, a cold pressed juice shot. But I'm not sure that, we're looking to enhance our mood when we're plowing through a pint of ice cream, in front of the TV. And I always joke that that ice cream is already mood management. It makes you feel good while you're eating it. But ice cream will always be about secular sin, not function, not nourishment. And so, and you look at Halo Top, so Halo Top struck gold when they quit marketing healthy ice cream and simplified to a low calorie storyline. This was the ultimate weight management prize, right? The high stakes benefit was that you could eat the whole pint. So a good starting point is to reference that mass market proposition of that accepted category leader and try to layer on one new benefit that speaks to the masses. That's kind of where I'd look at it. And then also crossover brands keep things simple. Good Crisp is simply a better for you spinoff of Pringles. RX, simple ingredient protein bars. C4 Energy is all about explosive energy in fun flavors. So you look at how simple these are for shoppers to kind of just define in their minds, right? This proposition to wrap their head around and understand. So you don't want to bury the lead. Crossover brands are masters at isolating the shopper's attention toward a simple, clear proposition. And most CPG founders have this tendency to layer on product features and attributes with an expectation that each certification or each call out is going to attract an additive audience that is going to compound their shopper base. And it's oftentimes quite the opposite. So instead, I would ask, what is the minimum viable message that you can present to attract the maximum viable audience? And so moving on from that point, I'd say that the best part of my work is that I get to subject my family and friends to sampling 10 or 15 new products every month. And most are tolerable or mildly enjoyable. They're fine. But what that means is that they're really just waiting to become kind of quickly forgotten or replaced. So I think it's really important to talk about product memorability. And what I'm looking for is perfectly demonstrated by this little girl here. I want instant emotional attachment. You know, when a product is so good, so craveable, or it can be, you know, super efficacious, or convenient, but there's something there to where it becomes immediately essential or beloved. And that's something that's often overlooked and not talked about. And for me, just to give you an example, for me, this was Tate's, right? In those perfectly crispy and buttery chocolate chip cookies. The first time I had it, I knew I loved it. And I would buy them week after week. Another is Noosa. And they had this kind of like sinfully delicious yogurt that you could just put it in front of people and watch their eyes light up the first time they tried it. And I was hooked right away. So crossover brands make products that stick because they design formulations and flavor experiences and sensory experiences that please the palates of those mainstream shoppers. And this liberates the brand from having to resort to expensive push marketing. You know, product fanaticism is the ultimate pull marketing. It'll save you a lot of money if you can design a product that people just need to try once and you don't have to market to them. Your CAC goes down exponentially. So that's what you really need to build on. And in a world that is abundant with choice and short on attention, there's really no room for passive indifference about your products. You know, if your product's not eliciting a convincing response from mass market shoppers when you put in front of them, you want to keep iterating. So calling card number 5, crossover brands are adopted into the rhythms and the routines of our lives because they tap into existing and frequent usage behaviors. And it's kind of crazy to think of the tens of thousands of SKUs in a store that there's only a handful that are going to be restocked in fridges and pantries week after week, right? So if you kind of think through of your own mechanical purchase decisions, what are the things that you consume through and replenish every week? You know, there's actually very few of them. And so that in itself is, you know, creates a lot of risk for investors when you're thinking about, you know, how many of these products that I'm looking at are truly going to become habitualized in consumers' life, and to what degree, right? So any brand can instigate trial as you're just getting going and moving into new retailers. What I want to know is how many people are going to buy this over the long term. And not just retention, but scale of retention, literally how many people are going to keep buying this and buying it over the long term. And then how often will they buy? You know, so this is purchase frequency. And then how many will they buy? And this is unit buy rate. And will this behavior withstand environmental forces? So the threat of new entrants, and what about economic downturns? And what about new diet trends and fads that come along? So you want to take all of these things into consideration about what are the forces at play that are going to potentially break consumers from maybe an initial interest in the product and something that really sustains over the long term. So I'll just spend a couple more minutes on this. There's some warning signs that I look for slow turns, even if I love a product, right? So first is, you know, is there a deal-breaking like sensory trade-off, right? And you get this a lot with alternative pastas that are on the market, like just the mouthfeel sometimes it's a little too chewy or gummy, right? The health proposition we all really love. We love the category, we love the opportunity space, but we love the health proposition, but the product experience itself, if you put this in the mouths of mass market consumers, they're going to detect those sensory trade-offs, and it's not going to be worth the health benefits that come along with it, right? And then are there learning curves or behavioral precedents that you're introducing, right? And so like there was a product like Mixcraft, right? Which I really love the premise of it, but when I had it in my home, I was like, how many times am I going to go into my pantry to find a packet of powder that would replace a juice and a DIY cocktail that I'm making at my home, right? So how it lives in the household and gets used is a big piece of this. How situational or infrequent is that use case or the need state, right? So a lot of your specialty products are going to fall into here, cooking sauces, condiments, oils. Does the package have low visibility within the household, right? In the fridge, does it lay flat to buried under my bread in my bread drawer, like a lot of tortillas, things like that? Is it easily lost in the back of my pantry? Does it get tipped over? Is this something I stock in my purse, gets buried in the bottom of my purse? So is it inconvenient or cumbersome to use or replenish? That's a factor. Does it live in a disadvantaged merchandising environment that makes discovery difficult? So all of these things you have to think through just in terms of how pervasive is this product going to be at point of sale, in the household, and in usage. So if we're talking about making waves at mass market retailers, we have to talk about price point. And I want to just take a second here to play this video. Some of you have probably seen this, but I think it's a good way to kind of start to drive this point home. So I'll play this here for a second. We'll come back.
Organic oat milk, $260. Wait, how much are these lemons?
$53.
Thank you.
I paid $48 for parking.
Oh, you parked? I'm sorry, I valeted.
How much for this honey?
$200.
Great.
And how much is this cereal?
$419.
Great, I'm gonna take 2. I make healthy choices.
How much for this avocado?
$150.
Taking it.
Sorry. Sorry. Whole milk? I'm sorry, I think you're looking for Whole Foods.
We're better than everyone.
I have money.
How much for this jar of almond butter?
$1,000.
Taking it. So rich.
Yes, we are.
So it's meant to be a spoof, but I think it's effective in kind of driving the point home that as you look to go further into conventional retailers, price point is going to be more and more of a consideration, right? And premium prices can immediately eliminate 80 to 90% of consumers as you venture into high volume retailers. So if you're killing it in Erewhon, just be prepared to see those velocities drop as you break out into more mass market stores where price becomes more of a consideration. And so, I kind of think of it as is a good rule of thumb is to try to stick within 10% of the conventional category leader, which I know sounds impossible. How is that even, realistic? But if you just start by stripping away unnecessary attributes, certifications, even ingredients, just down to your minimum viable innovation. And maybe you don't have to do that today, but if you're starting to think about that for down the road, I think that's a good place to start. And that doesn't mean that crossover brands have to be cheap. They don't, but they enable habituality because they deliver value. And I think a good example of that is like Goodles mac and cheese, right? So Goodles is like 2x the price point of Kraft's Blue Box, but doling out $2.99 to nourish a couple of hungry kids, that's a relative steal compared to what you'd spend preparing a meal from scratch. So, off this slide. Finally, I think the last point I'll make here, the seventh calling card, and this is the most obvious, I would say, but yet very rare indicator of crossover potential. But there's a very small handful of crossover brands that are going to come rushing into conventional retail backed by a fanatical customer base whose kind of collective vocalism is just compounding this kind of gravitational pull everywhere the brand goes. And that's really, really valuable to see from an investor point of view. And that doesn't mean that you have to have, millions of views online or to build a lifestyle brand that weaves its way into kind of all these different corners of a consumer's life, with content and peripheral offerings like what you see from a Liquid Death. Case in point is like a Skinny Pop, right? So their rapid ascent, you could see it happening. It was signaled by this kind of raucous advocacy amongst a community of moms who are really desperate to have their very own kind of personal, mindless, guilt-free snack. And I think of like a Mayomi, they had become beloved because it was kind of allowed people to have this kind of affordable yet respectable wine in their household to put out for guests. Distributors kind of caught wind of this fanaticism around Loverboy because they were seeing shoppers who were Instagramming road trips over state lines to get their hands on their hard teas and loading it up into their trunks. So some products are just inherently more kind of passion driven, like whiskey and chocolate and bagels and bacon and Chex Mix, and others are not kind of inherently as viral, like loose leaf tea or bread or condiments or baking mixes. And so I think that matters to a degree, but you take a brand like a Liquid Death and just, this really speaks to the value of brand. But Liquid Death, I think, is a reminder that a magical kind of brand experience can transform even a basic necessity like water into this kind of statement making badge of identity. So this is really the most difficult path to pave. And because of that, it's probably the most rare outcome. And these brands become exponentially more valuable than their peers if they nail the brand part. So what we look for are early signs of a founder who is at least tuned into how they will go about brand building, how they will matter to the world beyond kind of a transactional product experience. So that's it. Those are the calling cards that I've kind of pulled together. Next year there may be an eighth, or maybe I merge a couple of these together, but here's a recap here. You want to make products that are already familiar and approachable to the masses. You want to anchor to benefits that are meaningful to the masses. You want to isolate the shopper's attention toward a very simple, clear proposition. You want to create instant product memorability and attachment and you want to see that happening very early on through product trials beyond the people who are in your immediate circles, who have the same kind of palate as you. You want to create instant product memorability and attachment. You want to tap into pre-existing and frequent usage behaviors, so products that people are already consuming and using with a routine built into it, and deliver value propositions that maximize replenishment so that it enables affordability enables the habit, and you want to build fanatical consumer bases. And so the last thing I'll say here before we end is that piece around product memorability. A big part of what I do, as I said, is we get a lot of samples shipped to the house, and I'm being here in Ohio, I share it out amongst my family and friends who shop at the stores I was talking about. And the one thing that I want to see is just how quickly or how many people are coming back to me and texting me and saying, hey, Adam, that product that you got or that case that you gave us, we consumed through it in a week. We loved it. Where can I go get it? Right. So that's what you really want to be able to spend time as a founder in, is making sure you're doing those exercises, getting your product into people's hands who might represent that next tranche of shoppers or that cohort of shoppers that you're looking to acquire, and make sure you're getting that type of fanatical response before you blow out too much further. So that's it. That's it for me, Tom. I'll pause there, grab a drink of water, and open things up.
Great job. Thank you, Adam. Quite comprehensive and inspiring. We do have a couple of questions. If you have one, just before we start reading them off, go ahead and put them into the chat. Or if you want to raise your hand, we could do that as well. First question comes from, I'm not going to read the names just in case the person doesn't want their name read, but I know this person and they are about to launch a beverage brand. Adam, to what extent do you believe brands can start niche outside of the sweet spot and then evolve over time to be more in that sweet spot and hit across the 7 characteristics of crossover brands? And do any examples come to mind?
Yeah, so one, I think it is possible. And I think that if you follow a lot of the brands who accomplish this, you'll find that, right? So what types of changes do you see? You'll see formulation changes that become a necessity as you try to work through COGS and try to, deliver a value proposition that I think is more in line with those mass market shoppers. So I think it's oftentimes a natural evolution for brands who start out in more premium natural specialty retailers, and then they start to start to change as they go. And I would kind of consider Siete as an example, right? So if you look at even just the brand itself, right? So Siete, I think, identified first as a nut-based, premium nut-based tortilla company. They were originally called Must Be Nutty, and eventually I think zoomed out to realize that they were just going to be kind of a better for you Mexican pantry staple brand, and that necessitated the change to a new brand name, kind of a new identity. I think it changed a little bit about how they were going to go about building out their product roadmap. And so same thing with like a Poppi. So, Poppi was kind of this, apple cider vinegar, like botanical kind of beverage that was a little bit more niche and nuance, and kind of gave them a little bit of footing as they were called Mother. And then, eventually realized that the bigger opportunity for the brand was kind of to create, the modern version of soda. And so there are pivots all over examples of pivots all over the place. But I think the sooner that you kind of lock into how does this innovation that I have currently in front of me, how might that evolve to get to where I ultimately want to go, depending on where you want to go, that's probably going to impact brand, product positioning, product language, product descriptions, formulations, flavor experiences, all those types of things.
Great, thank you. Next question. Do you have any comments on how trending mental wellness phenomenon is reflected in any or all of your 7 points?
Well, I think my mind goes first to the point we made about high stakes benefits, right? So it's a lot of times it's relative. I think that everybody it's in news headlines when we're talking about mood management and mental well-being. I think it's in news headlines. I think the country has become more and more aware of this, and that it's not particularly confined to a part of the country or some sort of socioeconomic status, which I think is great. But I think there's probably some cynicism from maybe more mass market consumers around the believability that I can actually receive this benefit from certain types of product formats, right? So I think it's important to consumers universally, but that the believability of that I would get this from a consumable, number one, versus maybe some sort of other, I'm talking to a psychologist, or, I go to counseling, or I exercise more. So I understand all of the hype and kind of innovation around it, but I struggle a little bit sometimes with how some CPG entrepreneurs are maybe drinking their own Kool-Aid a little bit too much around kind of like, will consumers actually value this proposition in this type of product form or usage occasion?
Great, thank you. Next question. At what point should a small regional natural brand who's in the natural channel or specialty channel start thinking about the market comparison to conventional products?
So I think I would be, this is where it's probably good to set some context that I didn't set up front, right? So not every brand needs to go, and it's not about like top line revenue so much, right? Like 50 million revenue, 100. We're talking a lot these days around unit economics and path toward profitability, which I think should be the first focus. And that, not every founder is coming into this assuming that they're going to build something that is on every shelf in a Target, a Walmart, a Safeway, a 7-Eleven. So that doesn't need to be the end game for everybody. But if it is, then I think that it's very important very early on to start to see how far away you are from those mass market category captains that you're kind of including in terms of part of when you're putting together your total addressable market or where you're going to steal share from, to see the gaps in your product formulation, your price point, your overall value delivered, how you actually tap into, I think, some of their product strengths, how you contrast those. But I would be thinking about that now, working very far in advance, I think, of maybe an eventual authorization from those retailers. Because the thing you have to remember too is that you get a lot of retailers who, it's no skin off their back if they're going to take you in too early and take your slotting fees, put you at shelf, but they don't get you, but consumers don't respond to it. They're just going to replace you with another brand at shelf. And oftentimes it's very hard for early stage brands to go and recover from that. So that's why I would be maybe even iterating in my mind of what that kind of mass market innovation might look like and what those product line extensions might look like, and seeing if I can get some prototypes and formulations made and start seeding that out a little bit before I make that leap.
Awesome. Next question. How important is the right merchandising or being merchandised in the right category in order to stress test these attributes for your product? And I think maybe by attributes, they might mean the 7 calling cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm seeing that one here. Let me take it in just for a sec. So actually, I thought I was reading that one. I don't see it here. Can you read that one again, Mike? Sorry.
Sure. How important is the right merchandising or being merchandised in the right category in order to stress test the 7 calling cards of your product?
I'm not sure if I know exactly how to answer that one, but I think so obviously environment matters, and I'm trying to think of an example, right? So I think it's probably going to be more about how you position the product to consumers is going to dictate a lot about where you want to ask retailers to position you in the store, right? So I think of it as there's certain parts of the store that are kind of like a no man's land, right? So you want to get into, like, I look at like in a Whole Foods with their premium snack sets, right? So where you get some of the trail mixes and the dang chips, and where you get all of these different kind of product types coming together into one category that I think can sometimes be a little bit different than what you see when you go into kind of mass market conventional retailers where they have more dedicated zones. And so I think working that out very early on in your mind about what are the most advantageous merchandising environments and categories to be in, and starting to reflect that into your sales pitches, superimposing them in your sales materials about here's where I want to be, here's how I want to be faced, I think is probably more critical than, I'm having a tough time kind of linking it to the 7 calling cards, but I think it's something that, is obviously important. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling a little bit with that one. I'm not sure how to connect those two.
Okay, well, is it okay if we share your email address in the chat? If people want to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
okay.
it'd probably be a better forum to dig in deeper through that, through a one-to-one call.
Okay, we'll do that. We've got 10 minutes and 3 questions in the queue right now. First one is, how should food and beverage brands that represent a certain part of the world, for example, West Africa, introduce products that have been around for centuries that all people can enjoy, lock in that sweet spot without sacrificing the culture?
Sure. So I've actually talked to a few brands who make, I think it was like frozen entrees, who are coming to the space, really trying to popularize certain regions of Africa, their cuisine in the United States. And I think that if you're looking to build slow and you have patience for the long haul, that you can get there. But that it's probably a little early to think that you can take some of those types of products and immediately introduce them into mass market retailers. And what you really need, I think, are trade winds behind you, wind at your sails from food service, right? So if I'm in Austin or New York or Portland, and I'm seeing more food trucks or more QSRs that are featuring African cuisine, the New York Times is featuring it more. I'm seeing it more on Food Network and, or on TikTok videos. That is really what you need to kind of set the stage for brick and mortar retail to be at a place where they can expect to see real kind of consumer demand for those types of products showing up at shelf. And you've eliminated some of the risk and mystery behind flavor experiences. But I really think you got to have that first. And I don't know that I've seen that happen yet. For that, I've seen it happen obviously with Mexican, different Asian cuisines. But I think you got to wait for, you got to be a part of helping to build that before you really expect to get that type of pull in large scale grocery retailers. But I will say one other thing, you can expedite that a little bit. And I think it's about how you approach product innovation, right? So if you can take some of the kind of iconic flavors and spices and seasonings, and maybe the protein itself, the rice or the meat is approachable, and you put it into a format that is kind of more Americanized, right? So a handheld with some rice, you take out some of the language that might be unfamiliar to that mass market mainstream shopper who is looking for something new, that you could probably accelerate adoption a lot faster.
Awesome. Next question. I appreciate the mother turning into Poppi story. I was not aware of that. We make a vinegar wellness tonic, and we have the same challenge of bringing this into the mainstream daily habit of the 90% you speak of. Mm-hmm. Any comments?
Yeah, so I mean, it was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was receiving some sort of vinegar-based beverage or apple cider vinegar beverage at the house, every few weeks. And I think, trade media had us all thinking that this was going to, become a really big segment within beverage and better for you beverages. But again, being here in Ohio, I could just put the product out on my shelf in a, vinegar or apple cider vinegar, I think was the kind of, prevailing kind of product positioning, that there was a lot of hesitation for consumers to even want to try it, right? Just based off of anticipating kind of a less enjoyable kind of sensory experience or flavor experience. And so I think it comes with some real kind of hesitation from consumers to want to pick up a product like that at shelf. I think a lot of it depends on how it's formulated, what type of flavor experience it delivers, but also you really want to think through a lot about how you build, how prominent is vinegar, the word vinegar, in your product positioning and in your hierarchy on pack and in your campaigns and your messaging, because that naturally is going to shrink your addressable audience.
Great insights. Next one. Out of the approximately $100,000 that you invest in rising a product, how much do you typically recommend founders spend on branding and marketing?
So the it depends, right? So most brands go through a very similar kind of evolution. In the early days, it's a founder working with, whatever kind of affordable tools are around them, or freelancers, to kind of get a product, get it to market, maybe $10,000, $15,000, your initial branding, packaging, just your core kind of launch assets that you need to get out into market with, I think is a absolutely fine approach. But what you see is a natural evolution, that if you can stay above water and you can grow and you can, prove that you've got something, that you'll be able to raise money to invest more and kind of level up the degree of polish behind your branding, behind your messaging, your product positioning, your product photography, getting a clearer sense of kind of, what the brand is all about, how to articulate that into really high stakes benefits, consumer facing headlines that have pull. And, so you want to know when you're on the precipice of making that next jump, that you've got your product in market, you're seeing response from retailers, you're seeing response from consumers, that I think validates going and spending that, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 investment in really investing in your most, prized sales tool, your packaging, and getting it to that next level. So I hope that answers the question, but I think it's really smart to be economical up front. You certainly don't want to go to, to shelf with a package that is just full of all these fatal flaws that are not going to, that are actually going to inhibit you from standing out on shelf and inducing trial. But if it's good enough, I think then that's a good place to start.
Awesome. Again, we got about 4 minutes. I think this is the last question in the chat as of now. I'll give you a second to drink.
Thanks. Ready to go.
What do you think is the greatest opportunity in beverage today? And thank you. This was amazing.
Oh my gosh. So I don't know how I could answer that question. I don't know where I'm just going to go with what comes to mind. And it's probably has a little bit to do with what I'm drinking here. So this is a product, Chicky Chicky Boom Boom, from a great founder named Andres Siete. Great brand story. We also recently invested in a product called Bowie. They make aguas frescas. But I think when you look at some of the popularity of products like a Sanzo, right, it shows that the beverage consumer is thirsty for new flavor experiences, for more cultural representation. And I think that if you look at the kind of Latin Hispanic community and you look at the cold case, you don't see a lot of that representation. So I think if you're looking at some of, the kind of the hero ingredients, fruit flavors, fruit juices that have largely lived in the kind of ambient world with different nectars and nectar products, things like that. And if you can find ways to bring that into CSDs and through, enhanced waters, that I think that's a really, really intriguing opportunity space. So, if you're optimistic about the success that Sanzo has seen, just imagine what that might look like if you take the largest kind of minority demographic in the US and you innovate around that.
Awesome. We had one other question that I saw a minute ago and it seems to have disappeared, so I'm going to do it by memory. The Cauliflower and one other brand that you used an example, this person referenced that they thought the brands were starting to plateau out in the mainstream. And so I think the question was something along the lines of how effective can simple messaging, be, and how far can it really take you?
Well, I think it probably has less to do with messaging, and it's more about, with Cauliflower, I mean, I think many brands would be happy to have reached their degree of success and to, you get to a stage where you're in, most available doors and you start to think about moving into new product categories, with kind of this underlying or kind of umbrella proposition. Like for them, it would be kind of low carb, meals and snacks, convenient low carb meals and snacks with kind of alternative, bases that replace what you would typically see from like a wheat or a flour-based product. And so I think that's the challenge that's incumbent upon any brand who gets to a certain scale and size, is kind of where to go to next. And but I don't think it has so much to do with messaging. I think it's probably just more about innovation pipelines and building kind of permissibility to move into other categories. Yeah, I think there's plenty of examples that you get to that stage, and it's less about growing 50% or 100% year over year, and it starts to become more big brand thinking, where it's like people showing up to work every day thinking about like, how do we grow 2 or 3%? So a little bit less risk averse, a little bit more about protecting what you've built.
Outstanding, dude. You're the bomb. Seriously, we've received a lot of praise and grateful messages for this and for you. We can't thank you enough.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I never feel quite qualified to be up here on stage and talking amongst people and sharing my thoughts on it. And I'm always more comfortable doing it in kind of one-to-one environments. But I'm just hopeful that there's a couple of points in there that may help people think a little bit differently about their approach to market, and how they might be thinking ahead a little bit about what's next for their brand. Well
said. Well, for those watching, Adam's email address is in the chat, and in case you're watching this post live and you don't have access to the chat, Adam's address is adam@wearetheangelgroup.com. Of course, he's also on LinkedIn. Adam, any closing comments?
No, I would just say that anybody who would like to connect on LinkedIn too, that's a great way for us to stay in touch with each other. You can find me pretty easily there. And then the Angel Group, I will say, where we are probably peaking with deal flow here at this time of year. And so if anybody's reaching out about that, just bear with us a little bit. We're backlogged a little bit at the moment, but I do try to get to everybody and respond to everyone. And then also on the other side with Thirstcraft, a big part of what we do there is really focused on helping brands think about how they present their products to the world that expands the market most. And it's a lot about product positioning and symbolism and high stakes benefits and messaging, consumer facing headlines, things like that. So I'm really, really bullish on the type of work we do and how it helps brands really take that next step. So if anybody wants to talk about that, not from a client, potential client standpoint, but I'm always happy to lend the resources of Thirst to, on a call to help people think through a little bit of that too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. We really appreciate it.
Tom is on mute.
For being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. We'll see you guys again soon.
All right. Thank you. And we will send the recording out shortly. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again, Adam.
Bye, everyone.